Hello, everyone. I'm Northern Westman, and you're listening to the Disciple Hour, episode 30. I'm joined today by Gentile gentlemen, and our topics today are Governor Kristi Noem signed a historic bill to combat quote unquote anti-Semitism into law. And then we will talk about the moo-moos in the state of Israel, red heifers causing a potential geopolitical crisis. I kid you not. I'll get into it. But Gentile gentlemen, welcome. Introduce yourself.
Yes, hello once again, everybody. It's good to be back, and thanks for having me. It's going to be a good one.
Indeed. So the first one, Kristi Noem, a Republican governor of South Dakota, signed a historic bill to combat anti-Semitism into law. And what does this bill have to do with this podcast, Christianity? Well, it could potentially ban certain Bible verses. Let's dig in. So she signed HB 1076. It's an act to require the consideration of the definition of anti-Semitism when investigating unfair or discriminatory practices. And they point to the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition of anti-Semitism. And so let's go into that here. Let me read this. This is from the holocaust-remembrance.com. Working definition of anti-Semitism. And here it is. Adopt the following non-legally binding working definition of anti-Semitism. And I quote, anti-Semitism is a certain perception of Jews which may be expressed as hatred toward Jews. Rhetorical and physical manifestations of anti-Semitism are directed toward Jewish or non-Jewish individuals and or their property, toward Jewish community institutions and religious facilities. Okay, this is the definition. But then they give examples. Check this out. Contemporary examples of anti-Semitism in public life, the media, schools, the workplace, and in the religious sphere could, taking into account the overall context, include, but are not limited to, and then they list a bunch of examples, and some are, you agree with, right? Justifying the murder or harming of Jews, etc. But then, when you scroll down, the third last reads, using the symbols and images associated with classic anti-Semitism, and then in brackets, for example, claims of Jews killing Jesus or blood libel to characterize Israel or Israelis. Claims of Jews killing Jesus. They give that as an example of classic anti-Semitism. So this law being signed in South Dakota now gives a legal framework to ban certain Bible verses. This is very dangerous, and Christians need to stand up. There are some Bible verses. If you just read the book of Acts, I'm not going to read it here because honestly, it will just, the ear is against the door. Okay, if you read the book of Acts, I've said this before, if you could fool Christians and the world, mostly Christians, if you were to, say, rewrite the book of Acts in a modern day setting and change the name of the locations, etc., and the names of the characters, and you would read this at church, I guarantee you, folks, a lot of people would call you an anti-Semite. There are verses saying that the Jews, riled up the mob against the apostles and stuff like that. This law then could potentially prohibit these Bible verses in the state of South Dakota. And this is coming from the Republican Party. However, our goal here today is not really to black pill over this issue. It's just that we need to be wary of this. The enemy will use clever tricks like this. He wants Christianity abolished and, ultimately just completely banned and abolished. And so he will use pretexts, right? He'll say that, there is anti-Semitism in the Bible, there is homophobia in the Bible, and it makes people uncomfortable. It makes them feel unsafe. And so the moral thing to do then is to ban these verses, right? And they will ban certain verses, reprint the Bible with verses extracted. But of course, they will extract more verses without people knowing. And they will continue to do so, and they will rewrite the Bible and ultimately just change it completely if we allow this to happen. And so that's the danger. And the other point we want to make is we need to start lobbying for ourselves as Christians and as Western kind. I don't blame other people for wanting to sign bills like this. Well, not when they're explicitly anti-Christian or anti-white, but in theory, bills that should protect them. I'm not really against that. However, I find it infuriating that our people don't even defend themselves. I want laws that ban anti-Christianity and ban anti-whiteism. I want those laws. I want it banned. If you go to a school and teach white children that they are uniquely responsible for slavery, I want you in prison. And if you go out of your way to spread anti-Christian propaganda, I want you jailed. I want you fined or jailed. And we should be pushing for these laws. And that leads to the third point. Some of these laws have existed. I will name two. One in my own country, Iceland. It was an anti-blasphemy law. It was almost never enforced. It was enforced, I think, 2 times. One, the first case was not worth mentioning. And the second one was when it was an advertisement that was kind of like a game of words. I actually thought it was pretty funny. It wasn't really blaspheming. So it wasn't like, calling Jesus terrible names or something. It was a joke, maybe taken too far, but it was a joke. Basically, there was this TV station basically called Sight, Eyesight, and it was set. The ad was set in like ancient Israel, and in the time of Jesus, and he is promised that he will get his sight back. He will get sight, and then some guys wearing traditional Israeli clothing, they bring a TV into his living room and they turn it on, and voila, it's this Icelandic TV station, Sight. Scene, it was called. Here you go, you have gained your sight. Funny game of words, but they were actually sued over this. And that kind of caused people to frown, like, wait, we have these anti-blasphemy laws and they're being used against people who are clearly just making an innocent joke. And so these laws were basically removed. You could say outrageous things about Jesus and you would not get prosecuted using these laws, but some TV station making an innocent joke was. I actually, in retrospect, think that this was deliberate. Make some case out of this and get the public attention and show them that these laws are quote unquote obsolete, and then have them removed in order to be allowed to blaspheme legally. It's a conspiracy theory, but never mind. So these laws, they have existed, but they are not enforced, or not enforced correctly. And then there's the case here in Denmark. So after the Hamas terrorism on Israel in October now, 2023, October 5th, I believe, I know that Germany, the state of Germany, wanted to make citizens or new citizens pledge loyalty to the state of Israel. Completely insane. But this was being discussed. And now Denmark wants to do the same. When I read it, I got very angry. Why don't we have these laws ourselves? But then I kept reading, and it said that, well, Denmark already has laws that claim that you have to pledge allegiance to Denmark. Oh, okay. But you're still allowed to spread anti-white propaganda in Denmark. You are still allowed to very you are allowed to conduct an organized white erasure of Denmark, and you still don't get prosecuted with these laws. And that leads to the point that I want to make. People will put an ideology, a morality above laws. And so the laws don't really matter that much. Of course, they do matter, but what matters most is the morality, the moral framework within the country. If anti-whiteism is dominant, then these laws, quote unquote, protecting the Danish and the Danish state and culture doesn't matter. I mean, people are freely allowed to express that the Danish don't have a culture, that they're better off if they're just white erased. It will be more fun. It will be more fun in Denmark if the Danes are all erased. You are allowed to spread this vile anti-white garbage because the moral framework is anti-white. It is a false moral framework. And so the point is, morality is everything. If you want to change the laws, if you want to get back your country, you need to start with a moral framework. You need to frame things in our narrative. And you need to show moral outrage. You need to have the moral high ground to protect Christianity with a moral indignation. A just, yeah.
Yeah, and it's a supplication. That's what it really is it's a political supplication. Especially in the United States, there are very large lobbies that pretty much entirely fund one side or the other, or even both sides of the political spectrum here in the United States. And in order to get money for campaigns and support from your party and these lobbies that really do fund just about all of the re-election cycles, you have to do certain things and you have to please certain people. And the thing that's the most questionable about these types of laws that very specifically outline a certain group, saying a law that specifically defines and outlaws and bans, quote unquote anti-Semitism, when there's already laws on the books that say you're not allowed to discriminate against people based on religion or race or all this stuff. So this law technically already exists. and it's meant to be used for everyone's protection. So why include laws that specifically protect one particular group that already has laws that they can use to protect themselves? And the reason why is to drive this narrative that there is this huge undercurrent of anti-Semitism swelling up around the world, and we all have to combat it. That's been the narrative in the news cycle for the last few weeks. A lot of reporting and news on the actual conflict in the Middle East is gone. They haven't shown videos from the Middle East for weeks. There haven't been, any of these, big news cycles covering the conflict, and it's still going on. People are still dying, buildings are still being blown up. Like the conflict still rages just as much as it did a month or so ago when it was first starting. But the news coverage has almost completely disappeared, and now a lot of the news coverage, just like a couple years ago when white men were the most dangerous, group in the United States, now they're just talking endlessly about anti-Semitism and how we have to combat anti-Semitism, and that's all they're talking about. And they're avoiding talking about the conflict, but they still want to run protection for the conflict by making it to where you can't criticize one group that's involved in this conflict. And so when you look at the bigger picture, it kind of makes more sense why they're trying to specifically put more of these laws in place so that there can be even more consequences for saying certain things or talking about certain topics you're not supposed to talk about. And I don't want it to seem like we're picking on this one individual group. I don't support or endorse antagonizing or harming Jewish people in any specific or special way. But to say that specifically criticism of the state of Israel or criticism of this or that automatically means you're inciting hate against this group of people, regardless of what the criticism is, that is dangerous. And that is not enforced when it comes to Christianity or, as you said, white people or other certain groups. And it is amazing how ignored it is that no matter what resources you look at, Christianity is the single most persecuted religion in the world. This is supported by the Cato Institute, which I have articles that they've published here. March 7th, 2022, the Institute did a analysis study of worldwide statistics on religious persecution. And there are more countries that are significantly persecutory towards Christians than any other single religion. More Christians are murdered for their faith than any other faith, including Islam, which almost has as many as adherents as Christianity does. More churches and religious buildings and sites of Christianity are defiled, destroyed, or vandalized than any other religion every year. And admittedly, a lot of this takes place in the Middle East. It takes place in North Africa. It takes place, in Singapore and these other places that are not the United States, because the United States is a Western, Christian nation still for the most part. And so, yeah, in this country, we're relatively safe. But around the world, the most dangerous religion you can be is Christianity. And no one ever talks about it. No one ever speaks out against it. No one ever makes any laws that specifically protect against that kind of persecution or anti-Christian, attitudes or speech or any of this type of stuff. So when you hear the news talking about all this stuff about, oh, anti-Semitism's on the rise, all they really mean is like more people are talking about Jews on the internet. It's not like Jews are being killed. It's not like, synagogues are being burned down all over the place. Like that's not happening. They're really just talking about, oh, well, people are talking about Israel on the internet. So look at all this big rise in anti-Semitism. And so talking about Israel on the internet is worse than Christians actually being killed and persecuted in other countries. And it's more important to talk about and more important to make laws about. And when you put that into perspective, it's quite ridiculous. Like I said, especially since we already have laws that protect Jews, but that protect everyone. Those laws don't specifically say they protect Jews in general. They protect everyone from being persecuted or, prejudiced against based on certain things, whether it's religion or race and whatnot. So to add additional laws that point this out is more about driving a narrative than it is about, oh, these people need extra protection, and creating this illusion that there is this big, huge problem on the rise. Um, just last year in 2022, the figures are over 14,766 churches and Christian properties were attacked, demolished, vandalized, or destroyed. And we know all across France that churches have been burnt down and attacked, and we kind of know what's going on over there and who's driving that. A different group, not the group that we're mentioning here. So it's not just coming from one group, but there is a lot of anti-Christian suffering and persecution around the world, and our supposedly Western Christian leaders are so obsessed with protecting someone else that they don't protect their own people or fellow Christians. And that does deserve criticism for that reason. Not so much that there's any issue with them saying, oh, yeah, no, I support Jewish people. I don't want anyone to victimize Jewish people. There's nothing wrong with that. But why don't they ever talk about their own people? And why don't they ever talk about Christianity? And as you pointed out, to say that certain things that are in the Bible that are simply factually true, even Jewish people will tell you, like, oh, yeah, we did have Christ killed, and that's a good thing. So when you say it's a good thing, it's not anti-Semitic. But if you say it's a bad thing, like, oh yeah, the Jews killed Jesus, and that's pretty bad. Hopefully they atone for that one day. Then it suddenly becomes anti-Semitic, quote unquote. And that is where that becomes extremely dangerous, as to where you can't even just say things that are factually true, even if it has nothing to do with persecuting or harming Jews in the modern day. Um, and it'll segue into our next topic here, but I'll pass it back to you, Westman, if you want to have any more thoughts or anything on that particular issue.
Yeah, you raised some good points. And while you were talking, of course, I just remembered, I mean, there are already laws in place that legally allow to discriminate against whites. You don't have to hire white men. There are companies, I think it was Microsoft, this year, that it announced that it was not going to hire any white men in 2024. I believe it was. If I'm incorrect, I will correct it. But yeah, there are certainly laws that discriminate against us. It started with the Swindle Whites movement in the 1960s. It's spelled civil rights, but you actually pronounce it Swindle Whites, FYI. And also regarding this thing you're saying, you're definitely right. They want to create this false sense of reality, this virtual reality, so that people buy their nonsense. But anti-whiteism is actually now harming Jews way more than it did. We know that there have been anti-white criminals who have targeted Jews, either hurt them or killed them, but they did it because they thought they were white. I know of these instances. I remember reading one from the Daily Wire a few years back. But anti-whiteism definitely has harmed Jews. And now, when we saw this attack on Israel by Hamas, do you remember that some BLM account actually celebrated it, and they actually, I mean, these are really low IQ anti-white dumbasses and monsters. They believed that this was attack on the white race when it was not. They celebrated it because they thought that this was an attack on Western kind. That's how anti-white they are, and also shows you how stupid they are. But they are dangerously stupid. And anti-whiteism is going to harm Jews a lot more than it already does in the future. But of course, this also shows, this is so enlightening. It also shows you that they are not willing to, um, what do you call it, introspect and admit that, well, anti-whiteism has to go. We're becoming very unsafe because of anti-whiteism. No, they double down. That's how anti-white they are. They don't care. They don't care one bit. They will just blame it on anti-Semitism when really this is just, in some cases, anti-whiteism on steroids, now harming the Jews. We're beginning to see the event horizon. That is, the event horizon is when the many anti-white groups of non-whites will start going after each other. And now we're seeing the Jews being the main victims of that. So that's really what is happening. It's the event horizon in many instances. And you talked about, for example, you talked about on the internet, but while you were talking, I thought about some instance from a campus. No idea which campus, but in the United States, Jewish students being harassed by non-whites. And to actually think that this has nothing to do with anti-whiteism is insane and just really dishonest. It has so much to do with anti-whiteism. This attack by Hamas was really just a fuel on the fire. These non-whites are just looking for an excuse. These anti-white non-whites, pardon me. But I think I've said enough. It's just clear that this has been very revealing. And I think we've made our points across. What do you say?
Yeah, what you bring up there is it's halfway a self-inflicted wound, you know, because we do know that there are a lot of, celebrity people who are ethnically Jewish, but who will talk as if they are white. They'll write articles or give interviews talking about how, oh, me and my fellow white people need to do better. And they slip on this skin because they're, quote unquote, white passing. They look a little bit enough like us to where people kind of forget that they're a different ethnic group in the moment, and they'll say things like that and slip into that skin when they want to reach a certain group of people, mainly us. If they want us to listen to something they have to say, they'll say something along the lines of fellow white, or my white people. But then when they need to distance themselves from us, they immediately, oh, no, I'm not white, I'm Jewish. And it's very clear that they're talking to a different groups of people, so and so this natural confusion arises in people who adhere to the anti-white narrative, that, like, oh, well, if Jews look enough like white people, therefore they are white people. And you're right, they will have enmity towards them because they kind of see them as this adjacent group to white people. But also it is, this just, it's so programmed to hate white people because we're, quote unquote, the dominant group. Even though we're a global minority, we're a dominant group in our countries, and that's one big reason why we're so bad and why anti-whiteism is okay, because we're the dominant group and it's okay to fight against the dominant group. Well, when you look at the state of Israel, the Jews are the dominant group, and so this mentality of opposing the dominant group in every situation simply because they are the dominant group spills over and does harm, Israelis and Jewish people when you talk about the Palestine-Israeli conflict, because Israel is the dominant group. So you're right; it's halfway a self-inflicted wound, though, because people who push the anti-white narrative and push this ideology that it's okay to hate the dominant group, well, one day when your group is in the spotlight and you're the dominant group, then that mentality is going to spill over. Um, and that's really, why we see that anomaly happen, where people, like you said, someone on a BLM account, they see Jewish people that have fair skin, And they're just automatically like, oh, well, they're a dominant group, they have light skin, bam, yeah, they're hurting white people, and I love it. And and that's as deep as they'll think. But there is some justifiable confusion there because of how the anti-white narrative works. It spills over to other dominant groups, especially if they are fair-skinned or quote unquote white passing, which a decent amount of Jews, especially, those in Western countries, are. And so they are perceived as kind of an extension of white people when there is this aimed, unaimed anti-white anger. Sometimes they get caught in the crossfire of that. But there is also, some genuine Jewish hatred on that side as well. In New York City, Jewish people get attacked by, certain groups of non-whites pretty frequently. And that's another thing they don't talk about when they really bring up this topic about how, oh, anti-Semitism's on the rise and there's an increase in, attacks against Jewish people. They never mention that the majority of those attacks are by non-whites. They leave it
Yes.
ambiguous because they want you to think it's white Americans doing it or it's European people doing it. But the overwhelming majority of anti-Semitic attacks and harassment in Europe is not done by native Europeans. It's done by, migrants from other places. But they never point that out. They leave it ambiguous because they want to make it so that either everyone feels bad about it or that white people in particular think that there's an issue with them when there really isn't.
Right. And that's, yeah, you're totally right. And that also shows yet again that they how anti-white they are. They won't just admit the truth. They would rather be harmed than to put an end to anti-whiteism. So, but that's all I have to say.
No, I agree. Yeah, and it segues perfectly into this next topic that I had. I brought this up the other day with everyone, and so for anyone who's unfamiliar, there is something that is going on in Israel. And very recently, it kind of came into the spotlight. So it's actually been going on for a few months, longer than a few months. It's been planned for years, but it's really come to fruition over the last year and a half, 2 years. What was being done, kind of behind the scenes is there are certain groups in certain Jewish groups who want to perform a ceremony that appears in the Old Testament, the ceremony of the red heifer, the sacrifice of the red heifer, and that these groups and certain religious Jews believe that if this sacrifice is performed, that it will bring the Mashiach, the Jewish idea of the Messiah, and this leader that they believe God will send to them when they reestablish sacrifices and the temple. And so what was done is these Texas Angus cows, there were 5 red Texas Angus cows that were born and set apart, and they were transported to the state of Israel because they seemed perfect at their birth. And in order for these cows to qualify to be sacrificed, they have to be 3 years old. It has to be a red heifer without blemish or impurity, which mostly focuses, according to these groups, on the hair, the red hair of the cow. They're not allowed to ever sprout a white, black, or any other color hair other than red. They must be a perfectly red cow the entirety of their life until they're 3 years old. And these cows that have been shipped to Israel from Texas are about 2 years old now, which means they have another year to go. And they've narrowed it down to 3 cows. 2 of the 5 started to show blemishes, so they were discounted. They're no longer in the pool of potential heifer to be sacrificed. But there are still these 3 heifers, which within the next year, if one of them can make it to 3 years old without having any blemish, these groups in Israel have already constructed an altar to sacrifice this heifer to fulfill this, ceremony that they believe they should fulfill, to reinstate sacrifices at the temple. And this is also talked about in the New Testament of the Bible. This is prophesied in Revelation that this will happen, that sacrifices will begin in the temple, that the temple will be rebuilt, or at least attempted to be rebuilt, and that this will trigger the kings in the east, the kings in the north, and the kings in the south to all fight over the Holy Land, and that the Holy Land will be possessed by a foreign military that will destroy it, basically trample the city of Jerusalem for 2.5, 3 years in Bible prophecy. And so there are many Christians that see these Jewish groups constructing this altar, preparing these heifers, preparing the sacrificial robes that the priests must use in order to perform this ceremony. And this ceremony is about purifying the priests. What it comes from is that in order for the priests to be purified and sanctified to perform more animal sacrifices, this initial red heifer must be sacrificed. And what these Jewish groups want to do is not only rebuild the temple, but then reinstitute the old laws of animal sacrifice for the forgiveness of sins, and wheat offerings and burnt offerings and all of these other things. But from the Christian perspective, we know that once this happens, it sets in motion a lot of end time prophecy that will lead to the Antichrist, lead to the beast power, and lead to, the second coming of Christ. And when it comes to Jewish people, especially religious Jewish people, I understand that they don't accept Christ as the Messiah. So I understand why their perspective might not align with mine on this particular issue about animal sacrifices being blasphemous and sanctimonious and an insult to Christ. They are. But because they don't believe that, they don't see it that way. So I at least understand their perspective on it. The issue that I have with what's going on here is the promotion and the cheering and the assistance that is being provided by major Christian groups that want this to happen and that think they're supposed to support this behavior. And a lot of the, especially evangelical Christians, a lot of these big megachurch evangelical Christian preachers talk about this, and they want it to happen because it's going to bring back Jesus. Even though the Jews think it's going to bring their Mashiach, these Christians say it's going to bring back Jesus, so we should want them to do it. But what they're doing is sinful. What they are doing is denying Christ and his sacrifice and saying, no, no, we still need to be sacrificing cows. This is what God wants us to do. And so Christians should not be supporting this. We should not be trying to help this happen. And I've heard this preached many times in these mega churches how, you know, they want Christ to come back so bad that they're willing to do evil things to move prophecy along, as if God can be tricked or forced into arriving and appearing any moment sooner than he deems it necessary. There is no force, human or otherwise, on earth that can ever force God to do something he does not want to do or at a time when he did not specifically designate to do it. But these big Christian preachers are acting like we can do this, like we can trick God. Like, oh yeah, if we can help the Jews sacrifice this red heifer, and if we can help them start rebuilding the temple, I mean, they've said everything except and when the Antichrist runs for election, we should all vote for him. That's the next step, is basically them saying, oh yeah, I think this guy's the Antichrist. We should all vote for him so he gets into power so that he brings forth Bible prophecy and then Jesus will come back. Failing to see the inherent horribleness that it is to endorse setting in motion sinful behavior just because you want Jesus to come back sooner. We should not have this perspective. Our perspective should be that we hope as many Jewish people as possible turn to Christ before these events happen, because these events are going to happen. There is no stopping them. Just because we see that they're being set in motion, I'm not saying we should stop it either. I don't want anyone to think that I'm saying something along the lines of like, oh, well, the government should step in and stop these Jews and go and take these cows and destroy them and all this stuff. I'm not saying that because I'm not trying to interfere in Bible prophecy. The sacrifices are going to be reinstated. It's going to happen, no matter what anyone does. So trying to fight it, that's not our purpose. But trying to push for it and make it happen is also not our purpose. We want as many people to come back to Christ, to repent of their sins, to turn from their earthly and wicked ways before these events happen, so that as many people as possible can have the chance at being forgiven, having their name in the book of life. And I'll go ahead and make a prediction that you will see Christian preachers in the future, these so-called Bible shysters, that will cheer on the coming of the Antichrist. and that we should be happy that it's happening, and we should be happy that there's wars in the Middle East, because this is going to bring Jesus back, and it's awesome and it's great, and that Christians should be so excited about it. But that is not the right attitude to have. There's going to be much suffering, much destruction, and these things have to happen. There's no way we can stop it, but we are supposed to be reaching out and trying to get as many people to convert and to turn away from this behavior, not supporting it and cheering it on and electing people that cheer it on, and trying to basically help the Jews commit a sin that they may very well later be punished for. It's so cognitively dissonant in my mind that any Christian who knows anything about what prophecy says and how much suffering is coming to cheer these kinds of things on. But that is what you see in these circles, and it is quite disturbing. But I'll pass it back to you for any thoughts you might have on it.
Yeah, thank you. That is insane. And for those of you who want the scriptural reference, it's in Numbers 19, basically from verse 1 to 10, about the red heifers. But what you said is spot on. There's just so much to add, but we don't have much time. Yeah, people who cheer this on, they are dummies at best. I've talked about, we don't really have time to discuss it, but prophecies can be ironic. You don't always know how God will fulfill his promises and prophecies. He will, but you don't know how he will do it. For example, the temple being rebuilt in 3 days, nobody saw that coming, did they? Jesus being resurrected, him being the temple, like, people just don't, we don't know how these prophecies will play out, and we should not be trying to fulfill these prophecies. We should leave that to God. All we should do is follow his commandments. When Jesus said goodbye to his apostles, he didn't tell them, oh, by the way, do everything in your power to fulfill these prophecies. No, he told them, baptize everyone, spread the faith, baptize people in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. And he told them to keep his commandments. And he gave 2 commandments that basically span the entire law. Love your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength, and love your neighbor as thyself. There you go. We are not told to fulfill prophecies. You should always leave that to God. And frankly, I view the act of trying to fulfill prophecies as satanic. This is satanic. No one in his right mind would want to fulfill the prophecy of the number of the beast or something like that. This is satanic. It will happen somehow. We have no idea how the number of the beast is going to play out. We have no idea how these terrifying visions described in the book of Revelation will play out. They will happen somehow. They might be ironic. Let me take another example. Every knee shall bow. There are many, this could play out in many different ways. Will all humanity just, come to the realization all at once and just everyone bow together, and then voila, the earth will be consumed in flame, and a new earth, a new Jerusalem, the kingdom, etc.? Or will there be some cataclysm and only a handful survive, and only those with the strongest faith survived, and they will take the knee, and then it will be fulfilled? Or will simply every knee bow at Judgment Day, and then the book of life will be opened? We don't know, but every knee shall bow. It will happen somehow, but we should not force it into existence. We should leave it to God. That's my take, and I'd happily argue with people over this. I'm not going to try to play God and fulfill his prophecies and promises. That is beyond me. I'm simply a servant. I should only do what I'm commanded to do, to baptize and to spread the faith. That's what we're doing with this podcast. So, yeah, that's my 2 cents. Any thoughts, my friend?
No, yeah, I completely agree. Exactly my position is that, we are meant to live our lives as well as we can as the world moves on around us. But we are not supposed to, be going out there, like I said, and basically saying, oh, yeah, go vote for that guy because I think he's going to become the beast power and I want the beast power to come. Like, that is obviously an insane position to hold. And it is equally insane to say that you want conflict in the Middle East or that you want these sacrifices to take place. You want the Jews to, do these things so that you can get something out of it. It is the complete wrong position to hold. And you're missing the point. Because there is the catch-all verses that God put before prophecies every time. I believe it happened 7 times in the Bible. I might be wrong about the number of verses, but there are at least 7 verses in the Bible where God predicts that a punishment is coming. Something bad is going to happen. But he always caveats it and says, but if my people will realize their error and turn from their ways, and they will seek me and ask forgiveness, and they will worship me, I'll forgive them and heal their land, or I will give them back whatever the punishment entails. There's always that catch-all, and that's the attitude that we should have. We should be praying for the entire world to see the error of its ways. We should be praying for our people to at least see the error of its ways, that we may save as many of us as we can, that we may bring as many other people to the faith who are not in the faith as we can, so that enough people can turn. We should not be wanting bad, sinful, horrible things to happen just because at the end of the story Christ wins. That's obviously not the right attitude to have. We should be praying for the better. We know it very likely isn't going to happen because God doesn't make his prophecies for no reason. But that is our job, is to have that hope and to work towards that and to do the good, the true, the beautiful. Our job is not to, well, I want Jesus to come back sooner so we can hang out, bro. So I'm going to go ahead and donate money to these causes, or I'm going to cheer on the coming of the suffering and the coming of all of these things. That's a completely unhumble attitude to have. So no, I think we're totally in agreement on that.
Amen. Very well said. And yeah, I'll just add the final note. God hates when you don't trust him. You have to trust that he is just and that we will see a renewed world. You should go out into the world with that attitude. So very well said. And yes, God, he really hates when people don't trust him. We need to have the faith. We need to trust him. And yeah, I'll end it with that.
Yeah, no, good podcast, good talk. And yeah, like I said, as this situation develops, I feel like people are going to start talking about it more and more. And I'm sure there's going to be new developments to go about it. But yeah, no, very good podcast.
Indeed. Well, I thank you all for listening and God bless you all. Take care. Bye bye.